Let's look at this a little closer. I'm joined by Michael Bosicchio, a global affairs analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council think tank. He's based in Ukraine, but joins us today from Palermo in Italy. Thank you for your time. Now, the Foreign Ministry spokesperson for Russia, Maria Zakharova, has said that Ukraine understands perfectly well that the recent attacks make no sense from a military point of view. Is she right? Is there no military purpose to this?
Rarely anything that comes out of Mrs. Zakharova's mouth is to be believed. She's a propaganda tool after all. But absolutely, there's a military point to be made now after so many days. And that is that what the Ukrainians did, they spotted a vulnerability. And I do suspect that they had Western intelligence to do this with, because it is quite a sophisticated operation. But they showed that the Russians are very weak internally. They have devoted so much of their resources, both in terms of manpower and equipment, to the Ukraine-Russia front line, that they're very weak internally. And remember, not quite long ago, Mr. Prigozhin of the Wagner Group proved that point as well in terms of getting so close to Moscow. So it's a huge, huge military as well as a PR win for Ukraine.
So that's interesting what you just said there about having Western intelligence. A State Department spokesperson from the United States spoke to the New York Times and said that any use of US-supplied weapons would not violate US policy here. Do you believe that that point of view would be shared by all of Ukraine's Western allies?
I suspect it would be most of them, although I don't know if Mrs. Meloni here in Italy would agree with some of that. She's a bit more cautious out of that group of Western leaders. However, I think there's kind of quiet applause happening in London, in Washington, and in Paris in terms of what is happening right now. And of course, talking to my Ukrainian sources in Kyiv and elsewhere, this is a big PR win among Western allies for Kyiv in terms of you give us the capability to strike at Russia, and this is what we can do. And also the Ukrainians saying to the West is we believe this war is winnable.
That's really interesting there in terms of it being not just a military goal, but also potentially securing support still from the West, as there are so many other competing priorities. I wonder, when you look at the domestic situation in Russia, how you believe this might affect domestic support or criticism for the war, and how people in Russia would be viewing this.
Yeah, well, I'll preface that by, of course, we have to be careful what we see until it's verified by trusted bodies like the BBC. But seeing some videos today coming out of Russia, there's huge, I would say, disgust and anger among the ordinary Russians of not being evacuated in time, let alone allowing this to happen. So the other thing that we should note is that there's no obvious signs of insurgency or anger being shown towards the Ukrainians among the regular population, whereas when the Russians took control of Ukrainian territory, civilians did take action. And also, I have to give credit to the Ukrainians. BBC Verified has shown the video or the images of Ukrainian troops in control of that Gazprom hub. And the Ukrainians have not destroyed it or immobilized it because they know that there are international contracts to be honored and that gas needs to be kept flowing, as distasteful as that may be to them. So that's an interesting development as well.
And Michael, you've laid out some of the strategy there, the goals that Ukraine has. Do you think that they can sustain this sort of momentum, this cross-border incursion into Russia?
It's going to be very difficult. I mean, number one, they have some of their most skilled professional battalions involved in this, front and center. And secondly, the further in they go, of course, the longer your supply chain is going to be. So everything from basic things like keeping the men fed, but also machinery maintained is going to be a problem. But I think the Ukrainians will want to go as far as they can, because at the end of the day, not only the Russian POWs that they take, but also the territory they seize can be used as a bargaining chip in negotiations with Russia. Much easier to negotiate with seized territory than without it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because, of course, it could get to that point. This could give them leverage. Michael Bosicchio, really appreciate all your insight there. That was Michael Bosicchio from the Atlantic Council think tank.